Okay, good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, an overview of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, in Pennsylvania. I'm Matt Reese, GreenGov Council Deputy Director, and today's webinar is co-hosted and supported through our partnership with the Penn State Sustainability Institute. The GreenGov Council was established by Governor's Executive Order 2019-01, which requires Commonwealth agencies to lead by example, promoting energy conservation and sustainable governance. The executive order sets forth goals for the Commonwealth, including the goal of achieving a 26% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2025, followed by an 80% reduction by 2050. Executive order was created specific goals for agencies on fleet electrification, high performance buildings, annual energy reductions, and the use of renewable electricity. Visit our website at GreenGov, www.dgs.pa.gov/GreenGov to see how agencies are meeting these goals. You'll find a host of information on the website, including completed agency certification checklists, past annual reports, and GreenGov news and sign-up opportunities, such as the GreenGov quarterly newsletter and this future webinar series as well, this and future webinars as well. Now I'd like to introduce our friend, colleague, and partner at the Penn State Sustainability Institute, Peter Boger, PhD. Peter is the Assistant Director for Community Engagement at Penn State University's Sustainability Institute and is responsible for developing strategic programming and partnership, such as this one with the GreenGov Council, that help Penn State leverage its resources to promote sustainability throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Thank you so much, Matt, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. As Matt said, the Sustainability Institute at Penn State is the partner organization for this webinar series. And this is the third go round of this series that we've partnered on and are really excited about, because at the Sustainability Institute, our job is to think about how do we put sustainability and embed it throughout all aspects of the university, which includes everything from operations to teaching to student engagement to community engagement. And when we have to do that, we are a small team of about 10 people. So we can't do that alone. We need to do it by facilitating and networking. And so we see ourselves as conveners at Penn State, but also conveners taking Penn State across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and working with amazing partners like the GreenGov Council. So we have a very similar mission. The GreenGov Council is a small organization, but its mission is to embed sustainability and help empower others to embed sustainability across the government of Pennsylvania. So we are excited about this partnership. We're excited to be continuing this webinar series and would welcome the opportunity to reach out with any of you if you want to try to partner with Penn State on sustainability issues. And with that, I will turn it over back to Matt.
Well, thanks so much, Peter, and we certainly do appreciate the partnership. And now I'd like to introduce our guest speakers for this afternoon, Haley Book and Jenny Demjanik. Haley is the Senior Advisor on Energy and Climate, Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. In this role, Haley advises the Secretary regarding matters at the confluence of energy and the environment that come before the department. Specifically, she is coordinating the implementation of the state carbon dioxide budget trading program, which will allow for PA participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI. Haley holds a Master's of Public Administration and International Management from the Monterey Institute of International Studies and a Bachelor's of Science degree in Environmental Policy Analysis and Planning from the University of California at Davis. Jenny is the Assistant Counsel in the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, Bureau of Regulatory Counsel. In this role, Jenny counsels the Bureau of Air Quality and the Energy Programs Office, which includes providing legal counsel on Pennsylvania's effort to participate in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Jenny earned her BA from Lock Haven University and her JD and Master of Environmental Law and Policy from Vermont Law School. So with that being said, I will hand it over to Haley and Jenny.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the introduction and for the invitation to be here today. Are you able to hear me all right still?
Yes.
Great. Well, fantastic. Okay, well, as was mentioned in the introduction, barely a day goes by lately where there isn't news of the CO2 budget trading program, which is a regulation that provides the framework for PA's participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or more commonly known as RGGI. So this is a hot topic right now, an important topic, certainly one that is also controversial. It's playing out right now at the department, in the news, in the opinion columns, and also in the legislature as well. So fascinating topic, really important and timely discussion to be having right now for Pennsylvania, and happy to be here today to talk to you about it. So my goal for the next half an hour or so, 25 minutes, is to just give kind of an overview of what the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is, why it's important for Pennsylvania, why addressing climate change is important now, and how RGGI can help us achieve those goals. So with that, next slide, please. I cannot see, I can't see the next slide, but let me switch to my slides. Okay, we're working through some broadband issues here in rural Pennsylvania. Okay, so the climate change is impacting Pennsylvania. The department released in 2021 a climate impacts assessment that we are required to do by law. So every 3 years, we take a look at Pennsylvania, and specifically Pennsylvania's climate and what the impacts of climate change are on all sectors of Pennsylvania's economy, health, and most importantly, the environment in Pennsylvania. So we're seeing increasingly high rainfall events with related flooding. The first time that I can remember that there was school closures this year related to flooding. Heat waves are becoming more common. Health hazards due to increases in temperature, increases in air quality alert days, etc. And this doesn't affect Pennsylvanians all equally. I mean, many of us don't have the ability to change jobs, to relocate, or to adapt in a way that many other Pennsylvanians can. So, and it's becoming increasingly costly. PennDOT had a considerable amount of money that was spent repairing roads and bridges as a result of flooding, and certainly a disruption to our transportation infrastructure is a interruption to the delivery of goods and services, and there are prices associated with that. And more frequently, flooding has become localized. So when there's localized flooding, state emergency relief, federal emergency relief doesn't apply. And more these costs have to be burdened by companies, businesses, and municipalities alike. Next slide, please. And Pennsylvanians support action on climate. So every year, Yale conducts a climate survey nationwide. So specifically looking at Pennsylvania, in 2020, 72% of Pennsylvanians believe that global warming is occurring. Also believe is going to harm future generations. 68% of Pennsylvanians support setting strict carbon dioxide limits on existing coal-fired power plants. And what's highlighted here on the slide, 75% of Pennsylvanians support regulating CO2 as a pollutant, which is exactly what the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative does. So as you can see here, 75% of Pennsylvanians support that action on climate. Next slide, please. And that support is widespread. So you can see across Pennsylvania's 67 counties, a large percentage of Pennsylvanians statewide support regulating CO2. We're not just talking about Pennsylvanians from major metropolitan areas, Pennsylvanians in communities that surround existing power plants. We're talking about a wide swath of Pennsylvania residents statewide who support regulating CO2 as a pollutant, and as such support implementation of this regulation and the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Next slide, please. So as Matt mentioned at the outset, he mentioned the Executive Order 2019-1, encouraging the Commonwealth to address climate change and show leadership in a variety of areas, including energy conservation and sustainable governance. So that was the first time that Pennsylvania set climate change reduction goals, which are a 26% reduction by 2025 and an 80% reduction by 2050. And these numbers are based on the previous agreements set in the Paris Climate Accords, and are especially now as conversations at COP26 are underway, looking at even more stringent reductions and goals moving forward. And specifically, these goals have been set to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. So now that we have a goal, our goals, how do we reach them? So the governor directed the Department of Environmental Protection, under our authority, under the Air Pollution Control Act, to move forward and implement a program that is going to help Pennsylvania address climate change through specifically limiting emissions from the electricity sector. So I have on this slide just a brief calculation, so to speak. So when we talk about a 26% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, that is in comparison to what the levels were in Pennsylvania in 2005. So I've listed here what the 2005 baseline greenhouse gas emissions are, what a 26% reduction by 2025 would look like, and the reduction associated with participation by 2025, by that interim date, via RGGI participation. Now, certainly, as I'll mention, benefits of RGGI go well beyond 2025, with Pennsylvania seeing cumulative reductions year after year, further compounding the benefits of health and environmental benefits from the program. But even with RGGI alone, RGGI is not adequate enough to meet our 2025 greenhouse gas reduction goals. So it's important to note that RGGI is a piece and part of our approach to addressing climate in Pennsylvania, but in itself is not the total solution, even to meet our interim 2025 goals. Next slide, please. Sorry, guys, I'm moving along with you. So just an example how generation has changed in Pennsylvania. Before I get into the specifics of what RGGI is and how it works, I just want to mention that nationwide, there is a energy change happening. It is nothing new. It's been happening over time. Between the introduction of Marcellus shale, natural gas, the technology of hydraulic fracturing, technology in Pennsylvania has shifted, and so has the energy economy as well. So this is an infographic just showing examples of, Pennsylvania has very similar total generation in comparing 2019 to 2010, yet in 2010, 47%, almost half of Pennsylvania's electricity generation came from coal. Fast forward to 2019, it was at 17%. Just 2 years removed from that, we're nearing the single digits in terms of coal generation, electricity generation from coal in PA. So, and you can see a lot of that change as the coal percentage diminished, the natural gas percentage increased. So there's been a lot of fuel switching between coal and natural gas. And while that has helped to advance Pennsylvania's climate change goals and reduce emissions, there is more that needs to be done to continue and ensure that forward momentum and the reductions continue into the future, hence the consideration and implementation of RGGI. Next slide, please. So what is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, also known as RGGI? One of our colleagues has named his dog after the initiative. So right now there are 11 states, independent states, participating in the RGGI program. So it's a program of the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states who have come together regarding an agreement on reducing CO2 emissions in their states. So what they've done is they've agreed on a cap on CO2 emissions from the power sector. So we're not talking about an economy-wide cap and trade program that would institute emissions requirements on all sectors of the economy, from industrial, transportation, commercial, et cetera. This is specifically talking about emissions from the power sector, so large power plants that produce and sell electricity to the grid. And we're only talking about one specific emission, which is CO2 emissions, which are a major contributor to climate change. So these states all have independent regulations that work together as a program. Virginia just joined RGGI. Pennsylvania is well on its way, aiming for a 2022 start date to program participation. And then North Carolina is exploring entry and beginning the process for joining as well. So it's certainly a growing market as states institute and establish greenhouse gas and CO2 reduction goals, and then identify ways that are environmentally and economically sound to implement those. So I will explain how the program works, but essentially facilities that emit CO2 have to purchase an allowance. They must purchase one allowance for each ton of CO2 they emit. The proceeds, those allowances are sold at auction. So there is a market clearing price. So it's a market-based program. And the proceeds from the sale of those allowances return to Pennsylvania so we can further invest in Pennsylvania communities and reduce air pollution. So there's no central regulatory authority in RGGI. Every state has their own set of regulations. Every state is in charge of how many allowances they offer up into the auction annually. And they maintain their autonomy throughout the program. But the states share some basic things like administrative and technical functions through an organization called RGGI Inc. Next slide, please. Some of you have may heard of cap and trade programs, very common in the environmental sector, and cap and invest programs. So this just gives a quick depiction of what the difference is between cap and trade programs and cap and invest, like RGGI. So cap and trade programs have allowances. They require sources to turn in those allowances. The cap portion means there's only a certain amount of allowances available. And then sources can trade allowances. So if it's more expensive for one unit to make a reduction and then another, perhaps one unit will make that reduction and then sell its excess allowances or trade them with another facility. So that's a traditional cap and trade program. The difference between cap and trade and cap and invest is that RGGI allows us to invest proceeds from these auctions back into Pennsylvania, specifically all of it back into the Commonwealth, for us to invest in air pollution reduction programs. And as I'll mention coming up when I talk about the investment portion, these proceeds, Pennsylvania has committed to investing 40% of these proceeds in environmental justice communities, those communities that identify as low income and minority, and those that have been historically and disproportionately impacted by pollution. Next slide, please. So PA participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, just a kind of quick recap of what I discussed. It's a partnership in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. We're talking about capping and reducing CO2 emissions from fossil fuel-fired power plants. So if a power plant makes electricity and has no CO2 emissions, like a nuclear facility, wind facility, solar, etc., then it does not have a requirement under this regulation. If a facility combusts natural gas or coal to produce electricity and has CO2 emissions, then they have a requirement to purchase allowances to cover those CO2 emissions. And RGGI has been in existence for more than 10 years now. RGGI states have been able to significantly reduce their CO2 pollution by 45% while growing their economy. So while RGGI is not an economic program, it is an environmental program that absolutely has economic benefits in terms of state GDP growth and also the addition of jobs. And then, as I mentioned, this is a cornerstone, not the entire, climate change portfolio for Pennsylvania, but certainly a cornerstone of it, and will help us reach our greenhouse gas reduction goals in PA. Next slide. So how RGGI works, we're setting a limits on the amount of CO2 pollution from power plants, and year after year, that amount is going to decline. So we will offer less and less CO2 allowances into the market as the years progress. So we will offer those into quarterly auctions. Power plants will need to buy their allowances, again, 1 allowance per ton of CO2 to meet the amount of pollution they create, and then we'll receive fees from auctions to reinvest in the economy. And RGGI is an important, really important piece in terms of market economics, which certainly we don't have time to get into today. But right now, pollution is an externality, meaning that it is not included as part of the power sector. It's not included in the amount that is paid for electricity. So despite carbon emissions, all types of power production in terms of carbon are treated equally, when we know certainly that is not the case, as carbon has a significant impact on environmental and public health. So this helps level the playing field in terms of carbon pollution for energy producers in PA. Next slide, please. Terrific. So this is a two-second overview of how the wholesale power market works in PJM interconnection, which is our wholesale grid operator. So Pennsylvania and other states are setting limits on the amount of CO2. Again, power plants purchase the allowances, and then power plants, as they sell electricity, they have to factor in their costs. So if they have CO2 pollution, they have to factor in the purchase price of those CO2 allowances into the price of the electricity that they sell. And a very simplified version is the less pollution a power plant creates, the cheaper they can sell their electricity, because the way purchases on the wholesale energy market work is that the cheapest electricity is produced first, and as a result, we're sending market signals that the cheapest electricity is the cleaner burning electricity. So as a result, not only are we reducing the amount of CO2 allowances available each year, but we are also sending market signals and price signals that correspond to the amount of CO2 pollution that is created in the electricity process. Next slide, please. And so what are these environmental benefits? So these are 3 of the items that we looked at while we conducted a significant amount of modeling over the last 2 years. We looked at CO2 emissions and also NOx and SO2 emissions, both of which also have health impacts and are precursors to ground level ozone or smog, asthma, etc. So we looked at what the benefits are of participation in RGGI. So the blue bars are business as usual, or a reference case, meaning what would the future look like in PA without RGGI participation. And then the red or maroon bar is what the future looks like in Pennsylvania through 2030 with RGGI participation. So we're looking at a significant amount of reductions in CO2, NOx, and SO2 in Pennsylvania just through 2030 as a result of participation in this program. Again, 2030 because that was our modeling horizon, not because any sort of benefits stop accruing at that 2030 point. Next slide, please. And as a result, there are a tremendous amount of health benefits for RGGI. Health benefits can boil down to public health benefits, where we estimated between $200 and $500 million annually in public health benefits, less copays, less hospital visits, less doctor's bills, 500,000 less minor restricted activity days, so days that we have no air quality alerts where children can go outside and safely play who may have underlying health issues or asthma, etc. So we calculated these health benefits to underpin not only are there environmental benefits to participation in RGGI and to address climate change, but health benefits as well. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that RGGI benefits PA in a lot of ways, so I just also wanted to mention about job creation. The federal AFL-CIO supports addressing climate change, understands the job opportunities that RGGI and climate adaptation could create for its members. Recently, the Beaver Valley nuclear plant had indicated that they were going to close their nuclear facility and attributed Pennsylvania moving forward with a regional greenhouse gas initiative as a reason as to why it would keep its doors open and retain the more than 1,000 jobs associated with that facility. And then, you know, we're not alone in addressing climate. 60% of Fortune 500 companies have set goals to act on the climate crisis. They are looking for states who are like-minded to call home for national and international expanding headquarters. And states and companies have green sustainability goals that they are looking to meet with cleaner burning electricity. Pennsylvania is a net electricity exporter, exporting about 1/3 of the electricity that we produce to other states. And as a result of that, companies and other states and entities, though their demand for electricity is there, the type of electricity, their demand for cleaner burning electricity is increasing, and we need to be nimble and we need to be transitioning to meet that need in the future. And then based on our modeling, we saw a significant, almost $2 billion increase in gross state product and a net increase of almost 30,000 jobs as a result of the implementation of the Greenhouse Gas Initiative and investment of these proceeds in Pennsylvania's local communities. And as we talk about investments, investments in energy efficiency work cannot be outsourced. We're talking about creating jobs and saving energy in local Pennsylvania communities. Next slide, please. And RGGI will benefit our economy. So we're going to significantly decrease carbon dioxide pollution, about 10 times more than compared to kind of our business as usual. And we'll also be addressing the negative impacts of climate, which I opened with, which definitely have economic costs. We're going to generate auction fees that are going to further reduce air pollution in Pennsylvania. All of the investments will be made in PA, everything that we offer into the auction. All of those fees will be returned to us to invest in further reducing air pollution. I mentioned we're going to create positive economic benefits. And Pennsylvania is an electricity and energy powerhouse. RGGI does not change that, and it will strengthen our position to and ability to continue to sell electricity to those other states that I mentioned and meet that shifting demand for a cleaner grid and cleaner electricity into the future. And then I briefly wanted to mention Pennsylvania's coal-fired fleet. We saw the slide previously whereby in 2010, 47% of Pennsylvania's electricity came from coal-fired power plants. Fast forward to 2021, and we have 6 remaining coal-fired power plants in Pennsylvania. Of those 6, 2 are in the process of transitioning to natural gas. The Cheswick facility near Pittsburgh has announced its closure. 2 of the other facilities have announced that they are not able to comply with future federal environmental regulations not associated with RGGI. So that leaves 1 coal-fired power plant in Pennsylvania. So there are opportunities for RGGI to assist with the communities surrounding the coal-fired power plants. That's not within DEP's current authority under the Air Pollution Control Act. As I mentioned, our current authority allows for us to make investments in the reduction of air pollution, but there are opportunities in several bills, Senate Bill 15, House Bill 1565, that expand DEP's authority and provide opportunities to provide support to coal-fired power plant communities, workers, families, municipalities, school districts, et cetera, that rely on the tax revenue from these facilities. So a lot of opportunities for RGGI investments with our current authority or with expanded authority. Next slide, please. And then RGGI investments. So every year we are going to be selling CO2 allowances into the RGGI auction. And as I mentioned, the fees from that are going to come back to Pennsylvania. We have committed to making an investment of 40% of those auction proceeds in environmental justice areas and ensuring access of this funding to underserved communities. We are looking at programs from low-income weatherization programs to expanding appliance rebate programs, industrial and commercial energy efficiency programs, rebates, transportation infrastructure, electrification, et cetera. So our bounds right now for drafting an investment plan is programs and projects that will further decrease or improve, decrease pollution or improve air quality in Pennsylvania. So we have a draft plan that we are working on, and any sort of investment that Pennsylvania is going to make with the RGGI proceeds would go through a public comment process, much like we did for the Volkswagen mitigation settlement funds, if any of you had been involved in that process. So with the RGGI investments, we will publish a draft investment plan. We will seek public comment. We'll probably have a public webinar in addition to public hearings to make sure that we are hearing ideas and we are best investing this money in ways that can really help Pennsylvania and also help Pennsylvania's environmental justice communities as well. So a lot going on. As I mentioned, we are anticipating implementation of this regulation and the program in 2022. Exact date yet to be determined. And accompanying that certainly will be a draft investment plan. So we give the public a significant amount of opportunity to provide input on exactly how those investments are made so we can ensure benefits for all Pennsylvanians. And with that, that kind of brings conclusion to the formal part of the presentation. Next slide is my contact information. We have a whole host of all of the information regarding RGGI. If you're interested in the modeling information, all of the raw data is available there. We have materials also available in Spanish. And all of the presentations given to date to the department's various advisory committees on that website as well. So it's a great resource for all RGGI related items. But if you're not quite sure what you're looking for or where to look, please feel free to reach out to me with any questions. And with that, I'll turn it back over. I'll turn it back over to our partners at Penn State and GreenGov.
Well, thanks, Haley, for that fantastic overview. Overview of the RGGI program. We certainly appreciate you joining us today. And with that being said, I'm now going to stop the recording.